What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Somewhat Sports Podcast. A little bit of a different episode, structure today, but I think, you guys are somewhat used to it at this point. It is just a dynamic duo today and not the usual big three that we have here. Our fearless leader, Chris, is not in for today. He's out on assignment, just handling a couple things. Nothing big, nothing crazy, nothing serious. Of course, Chris will be back, next week because he's a trooper. He's our leader. But he has entrusted the ship, as he always does, to the two of us. And I think we have a track record of doing a good job. As always, it is one of your co-hosts, Jurg. And of course, joining me, one of the savants in the sports industry himself, my guy, Dame. Dame, how we doing?
I'm doing good, doing good. You and Chris are on to big, better things lately. Chris with a short film coming out today. Go check that out on YouTube. Jerk starting his new job at ESPN, the big boys now. So I gotta catch up to these guys.
Hey, it's no competition at the Somewhat Sports Podcast. So just growth and helping each other get better. And Chris, it's been a while since I've actually asked him for an update on his short film, so I'm very happy to hear about that. Of course, that's our guy. Make sure you go check it out on his YouTube. I'm sure I'll bully him into putting the link to his own stuff in the in the description. But yeah, so we have this, and I guess the reveal in our show that I I'm working for the giant 4-letter network now as a production assistant. So, exciting times for us. But Dame, exciting times, we say. Baseball is, well, it was exciting for a bit. And now it's kind of, I would still argue it's exciting just in a different way. But baseball is going to hit very, very differently here soon, my friend. So, of course, free agency begun recently, and the way we're going to break it down, we are going to go over the big deals that have been signed so far, the big contracts. A lot of money's been handed out as per usual with baseball, Dame. But then we're going to get into who's left while working some of the CBA, those horrid 3 letters, into the convo as well. So, Dame, I will throw it off to you. Of course, last episode, which we recorded a week before Thanksgiving, you and me, we personally gave some of our predictions on free agents, and a majority of the guys that we actually talked about have already signed. Who do you want to get? Whose signing do you want to get into first? Whether it be based off of shock value, they got paid more than what you thought, they went to the complete opposite team. Like who do you want to? What team or what player do you want to go with first here?
You want to just start with the big one and Chris's team with Max Scherzer and the Mets?
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's the perfect way to start the show. So
Chris would be happy.
obviously, yeah, none of us expected Max Scherzer, the best pitcher on the market, to go to the Mets of all teams. We had I think we both had the Dodgers, and Chris had the Dodgers as well. And not many executives had him even considering the Mets. I know there was a media thing that he had a preference to go to the West Coast or something like that. But regardless, there's a couple of East Coast teams that are named, but the Mets were never really an option, based off what we were hearing in the media. So this was especially a shock to hear that the Mets were even being close to the deal when it was even when it wasn't finalized yet. So I was definitely shocked. I'm sure you were as well. I'm sure the baseball world was shocked. And then just to be going to the contract details, he got 3 years, $130 million. That's $43.3 million a year. He broke the annual average value record by Garrett Cole a couple years ago with the Yankees at 34. That was a 20% increase, I believe, that I saw. That's kind of insane. Scherzer's 37 years old, so obviously it's a risk since he's so old. But I mean, he had his best year of his career last year. Granted, it was a lot of it was for the Dodgers, where he had a sub-2 ERA, so that kind of lowered it. Obviously, when you're playing on a team like the Dodgers, you're gonna have less pressure. You're gonna be able to pitch better and stuff like that. So it's definitely gonna be an adjustment playing for the Mets. I'm not saying they're a bad team, but they're not what the Dodgers were in the second half of the year last year, with all that offensive talent, all that starting pitching, all that bullpen. So definitely adjustment for them. But as for the Mets, man, I mean, you can't get a better 1-2 duo in the entire league than you have with DeGrom and Scherzer, unless you put DeGrom and Cole. But obviously, that wasn't ever going to happen. So good for Met fans. I think it's good for baseball. I like to see teams spend. We're going to get into that a little later about the lockout and stuff, but I definitely love to see teams spend. I think it's a really good signing for the Mets. Definitely puts them in as one of the contenders in the National League. Do I think they're the favorites behind the Braves or the Dodgers still? No, I don't. They still have a lot of work to do. But as for just this individual signing, I think it's a great thing for Max Scherzer, obviously getting all this money. Just as a side note, he's getting $15 million in deferrals from now
Right.
to 2028 from the Nationals. So really, he's getting like $58 million a year right now. So that's kind of insane. So that's obviously great for him. It's great for the Mets. Obviously, his entire fan base was psyched that Max Scherzer signed here. So good for them. Good for him. We'll see where it goes.
Right, absolutely. And I will say this, I think we can all agree. If you can switch lives with anyone in the world, it'd be Max Scherzer.
Absolutely.
Not even for the money he's already made, just for the what he's going to make. Heck, just for a year. If you could just swap lives, it'd be awesome. No, yeah, I totally agree with you. So the Starling Marte one really surprised me because I think him being he's 33 years old now, he's still a pretty good hitter, right? He can be a 15 to 20 homer guy, maybe even 25 if he catches a hot streak, right? I think he's still pretty good defensively. He's still pretty fast. I relatively do like the signing. My only concern when it comes to the Mets is that, I think Marte is the wrong injury away from him losing his skills because he's 33 years old, right? And I think the thing that a lot of people don't recognize it's not age that is necessarily the biggest regressive thing, it's injury. So I think if he stays healthy, I think everything will be fine with the Marte contract. If, 4 years, 78 million, at 33 years old, it's a little bit scary, but if he can, stay healthy, if he could keep doing his thing, I think it's an amazing signing for the Mets specifically. When it
You're
comes
right.
to
You're right.
yeah, and when it comes to Max Scherzer, I think you hit it on the head, Dame. I think you really nailed it with this is the best possible 1-2 punch that you could get at this point, and Scherzer and DeGrom as your 1 and 2. I think it's so valuable. I think now they definitively have the best 1 and 2 going into a playoff series if the Mets were to make it. So I think you have that ERA strikeout talent between those two. You have two NL legitimate NL Cy Young award candidates in your rotation. You have, championship experience with a guy like Scherzer. I just think what he brings to that lineup, man, and what it really does, it lets Taiwan Walker become the third guy. It makes your third guy become your fourth guy. Like what Scherzer does, it just builds your lineup and makes it stronger. And so that was an amazing signing. 3 years, yeah, it's a high annual value, but bro, we saw the second half of the year. He had Max Scherzer looked amazing. He put himself in the Cy Young Award conversation again at the end of the season when about halfway through it looked like he was all right but not great. Like the dude is special. And you said it yourself, Dame. We love to see when teams spend money. We want to see teams do it. And Steve Cohen is delivering here. He said that he was going to spend money, and boom, he got and paid Lindor. Boom, paid Scherzer. Boom, paid Marte. Like, of course, the success is to be determined, but Uncle Stevie is the Mets fans like to call him, Dame. He's delivering right now.
Oh, absolutely. Just one thing I would mention is I think it's a great deal. I think Max should have done it. I think the Mets should have done it. Just one concern for me would be that you are paying all this money for these top two pitchers. Like, granted, Jacob Degrom next offseason, he's gonna get an extension because he's 100% opting out of that team friendly deal he has. So he's gonna be paid probably even more to Max Scherzer. So you're gonna have a lot of money tied into these two guys. And honestly, the past couple years, these guys have had their injury concerns. They're not these workhorses that are going to give you 200, 220 innings a year. So for the Mets to go forward now, they really do need to build depth in that starting rotation and that bullpen because the Grom and you can't ask them to go 7, 8 innings every single one of their starts. Like they've had their injury concerns. They're both getting older. So you're gonna need to really protect them if you want them fully healthy for the playoffs because that's really where your goal is. You want to have that dynamic 1-2 punch going into a postseason series. But if you try to overwork them during the regular season because you don't have that starting depth rotation or that bullpen that you can back them up with, that might screw you at the end. So that's why I think their next step is to go.
No, I agree with you there, Dame. I think when it comes to you know the Mets, it's now all about just seeing everything play out, right? And to be determined if we'll really see everything play out in full as of this point. But I think with the Mets now, there's some risk assessment, but this is where you hope that you've built things right, and you need a little bit of luck. And hey, maybe this time the Mets will get some luck when it comes to the way they've built things. I think certainly like there's no denying the talent that this team has. We've talked about what they've gained here, Dame. So far, really fast. Let's just go over the one piece the Mets did lose, and that was Marcus Stroman. If I remember correctly from last week, last episode, I should say, we both had him leaving. Neither of us had him staying with the Mets. At least I didn't. I don't think you had him remaining with the team. And we predicted it properly. right? We had Marcus Stroman leaving, and he did leave. He went to sign with the Chicago Cubs. The 30-year-old coming off a very good season, as we talked about last time, ERA of just over 3, close to a career high in strikeouts, a whip of 1.15. He relatively great season, and now he's going to Chicago. Dame, what was your reaction to this? Because we saw the Cubs sell off so many pieces last year, right? They've essentially rebuilt, but at the same time in baseball, you can't out like it's sometimes hard to outright tank unless you literally just put a whole minor league team out there. What were your thoughts with the Cubs signing Stroman? Is that just a thing that they did so that there's someone on the roster, or like what do you think the mindset was for the Chicago signing?
This was definitely like surprising to me because this was not a team I was expecting to be on him. I thought it was gonna be maybe like the Angels or maybe the Dodgers after missing out on Scherzer, some of these contending teams. So it was definitely surprising to see the Cubs be on him, but I really do like it because like I said, I hate when teams don't spend money, especially these teams at the bottom like the Indians, the Royals, that have like sub $50 million total team payroll. So seeing a team like the Cubs who obviously they're not a contender. They're kind of rebuilding. So bringing a guy like Marcus Stroman, a good veteran, to put the top of that rotation next to Kyle Hendricks I really like to see it. And obviously from Marcus Stroman, he got the good contract, 3 for 71. He could opt out after 2 years. He has a couple incentives there that if he pitches well, could even go up higher. So it's good for him. And I know he said he hasn't really he's never pitched in Wrigley Field, so that's kind of cool too that he's going to that team now. So I like it for both teams. I especially like it because the Cubs are a rebuilding team and yet they're still signing free agents to kind of make their team better instead of just tanking the entire team away.
Yeah, and I'm kind of with you. I think that was the mindset. It's like the Cubs, yes, they understand they're rebuilding, but in baseball, rebuilding, that doesn't mean you completely take yourself out of it, right? That just means that you don't have as much talent, but you still got to field the roster out there. And I think that was ultimately the reason. And honestly, Dan, when you think about it, like we know the Cubs are going to go through a rebuild. But let's say 2 years from now they're still rebuilding, they can trade Stroman, right? Like with a year left, because I believe you said 3-year deal between the Cubs and him. Like you can trade him off 2 years into that deal to a contender and get some pieces back. So if you're really thinking about it, this still helps the rebuild at the end of the day. Like I don't think there's any negative for the Cubs, signing this deal because they have plenty of money to spend when you think about it.
Absolutely, yeah. You could trade him off easily. It's not a crazy contract where a team can't isn't going to be able to take it. I don't think they're going to trade him this year. I think it'll probably be next year and that year that he can opt out. So it could
Right.
be kind of an expiring deal, but it's definitely an option for them if the rebuild isn't going as they would like.
Right, right, right. And I think, I think Strowman, we kind of talked about it in the last episode, Dame, like that weird deal that we see, but it could somehow work out. I think this was that deal, right?
Hmm.
That we spoke about how it's like, didn't this wasn't the team that we had signing Strowman, but it still makes sense for them overall. So next thing I want to go to, Dame, I think we should just keep it with the pitchers here. And what better way than to talk about pitchers than a couple really good players from last season who swapped teams? Well, not directly, but
Yeah, yeah,
they switched sides. So we talked about how important it was. And I think you specifically, Dame, mentioned how like the Blue Jays, when it came to Robbie Ray, they had to do what they could, if plausible, to make sure they would keep him. Because at the end of the day, he was essentially the ace of that rotation. He won the AL Cy Young Award last season, a big time year. He had a 248 strikeouts with a 2.84 ERA. He was really good. He led the AL in WHIP last season. So when you think of that, obviously a guy like a Robbie Ray, we knew teams were going to want to pay him, Dame, and Seattle ponied up. And apparently, was it too rich for Toronto? I'm not necessarily certain. I think they were just having another name in mind when they saw the price tag. So Robbie Ray to the Seattle Mariners, 5 years, 115. Now, while that in theory is a blow to the Blue Jays, they didn't waste a lot of time there, Dame, because almost immediately they signed Kevin Gausman to a very similar deal, funny enough, but a 5-year, $110 million contract between the Blue Jays and Gosman. Now, from all intensive reports that I read personally, it said that like earlier in the day before the deal was signed, Gosman was relatively close to returning to the Giants. Like it was a real possibility he was just going to go back. But the Blue Jays came in. Gosman went 14-6 last year with a 2.81 ERA and 227 strikeouts. Legitimate Cy Young, candidate last year. He was absolutely great. Really, when you think about it, at the end of the day for the Blue Jays, I think because the prices are so similar, I know a lot of people are going to point to, well, why didn't you just keep Robbie Ray, right? And of course, we'll never know. Maybe at the end of the day, Ray's agents wanted more if he was going to stay in Toronto, right? Because think about it, Canadian taxes are a lot, higher up there, and maybe there was that. But at the end of the day, essentially a swap, lose the Cy Young winner last year, gain a candidate. Dame, what was your reaction? Did you kind of have like the same reaction I think some people had, which is like, why didn't you just keep Ray, or
Yeah,
did you think it was Blue Jays? The move kind of made sense.
to me it just didn't make sense at all because I think Robbie Ray and Gosman are pretty similar pitchers based on their skill set and like how good they are. And Robbie Ray obviously just won the AL Cy Young. Kevin Gosman didn't do that, and you had Robbie Ray in your building. Like you were comfortable with what he does. He was comfortable with what you do. The contracts are literally basically identical. I think they were what was it, like 110 and 115 or something like that.
Yeah,
Like it was separated
exactly
by
that.
$5 million, same amount of years. Like why not keep the guy that you had in house that won you the AL Cy Young and was an anchor in your rotation? Instead, you're bringing a guy who pitched on the West Coast in San Francisco, bring him all the way to Toronto, making him adjust when he was. Who knows if he's going to be as good as he was last year? And now you have to make him cross country all the way to a different country at that. And who knows if he's going to be as good as he was in San Francisco? Maybe it was just a thing where he was just so comfortable with San Francisco pitching on that team that was the reason why he was so good. But no, you bring him in instead of bringing back the guy we were so comfortable with, who literally he's the reason that you guys are even close to being a playoff team. Because without him, who knows where that starting rotation would be. So I think it was extremely stupid for the Toronto Blue Jays at best. But as for Seattle Mariners, I think it's great. Obviously, they're missing that entire rotation, to be honest, but they're a really young and upcoming team. They almost made a playoffs last year with their magical run at the end. So I really like what the Mariners did. I think Robbie Ray's gonna be great there. I think he'll fit in perfectly. And who knows, the Mariners, if they add another bat or two with, I know they're in on Chris Bryant and Trevor Story. Who knows? Or these other bats, if they really round out a team together with all those young prospects and for that farm system that's coming up, they could be a real threat this season.
Right. And yeah, I think this is one of those things where it's like we'll learn later on what happened here because on the surface, I know it's $5 million, but part of me just gets the feeling that Robbie Ray's team went for more with Toronto. Because again, like and because I'm a hockey fan, I'm used to hearing this play a factor in negotiations. But it's the Canadian taxes, right? And maybe that just didn't make a difference for Gosman because think about it, this was going to be like his first big deal, and someone was going to pay him. So I think he was cool with it. I think Robbie Ray, I think it was understood with his team. It's like they want to get the biggest deal possible. I definitely see your point. I think like why not just keep the guy in house? There's more familiarity there. Hope that he can continue. Gosman, yes, he had a great year, but is there a chance that he falls off more so than Ray? I don't know. The two of them, they were so close together, honestly, in stats last season, in age and like there's so many similarities between the two, then I can see the argument for saying, it's essentially a plug and place, right? Um, at the end of the day, would I have preferred if they would have just tried to keep Ray? Yes, but at the same time, what was the price? Like, I think that's something I want to see if we ever get the chance to when it comes to those negotiations. But at the end of the day, I think we both agree. Like you said, both these teams were so close into it late last year, Dame. And I think for Seattle, with if they can replicate the season, Robbie Ray could be the difference in them making the wild card. And I think the same thing with the Blue Jays, with not necessarily making the difference that like Ray couldn't, but just like, if they do make the wild card this year, this time around, like what that could mean for these. I mean, heck, we might get a wild card matchup between these two teams, Dame. Wouldn't that be something? Gosman versus Ray in a one game
That
play?
would be something because those are the two best pitchers on those respective teams. So that would definitely be the matchup. So that would be kind of crazy.
And in that moment you would know who won who won
Yep.
from free agency. But at the end of the day, I think we could both agree for both clubs, they keep ace caliber pitchers at least, going off of last season, and ultimately at the end of the day, um, for both clubs it makes sense, especially for Seattle. Dame, like I kind of want to touch on Seattle because I I had them making a big time deal last week. In the last episode, it wasn't Ray. Obviously, I think I had Seager going there, if I'm not mistaken, or I had him going somewhere in the AL West. No, I had Seager going to the Royals, but I'm not surprised that Seattle made this move. What does that say to you? Like we're seeing this new formula, Dame, where it's like teams are slowly building and then they make that one big move. What does that tell you about Seattle? Like, how legitimate of a wild card contender should they be next season?
It's definitely gonna be up to what else they can add in this offseason. I think they missed it by a game last year, and I don't. They really didn't lose anyone big, and they're young. They're a really young team and one of the best farm systems in the league. So it's really only up for them from there. And obviously, they didn't have a guy like Robbie Ray last year. And they're still making moves. Like I think they're gonna land a big bat. I don't know who it's gonna be, but they're definitely gonna add a high impact bat to that lineup. So I think sky's the limit, especially because you don't know how these labor negotiations are going to go. They might have expanded playoffs, and if it's expanded playoffs, like I definitely think they're going to make the playoffs. But it's also going to come down to what the Astros do as well, because if the Astros don't fill that shortstop spot, if Verlander doesn't come back fully healthy, if they don't address other needs on their team, like Seattle could be a dark horse to win that division as well, even without expanded playoffs.
Right. And that's something we'll get to in a little bit, like what the CBA could do, how that could change things for, these moves. Maybe both for both these teams, especially Seattle, maybe this move looks even better, once we see the fallout of what the eventual new collective bargaining agreement will be. And maybe this is a big time move that, Seattle made in advance because maybe they have an idea. At least they should. It's the freaking owners and players. So, but there's that. Dame, we've talked a lot so far on pitchers, and I think we're going to slightly continue that, but now we're going to transition a little bit here into the hitters predominantly. And let's just stay in division, my man. AL West, the Texas Rangers. My God, they, we were talking about that random team that was going to hit us over the head in free agency. That was the Texas Rangers. So the news came out the first. So at least for me, Dame, this is what I saw, and this is obviously how it went. The first bit of news that I saw was Marcus Semien, and I immediately thought, okay, that makes sense. They need more power in that lineup. I think at least from my point of view, because they made the trade with the Yankees last season. They got some prospects in. You have Adolis Garcia there, who he had a pretty good season, but you need more power. So Marcus Semien made sense coming off a career year for himself, 45 home runs, over 100 RBI. Like it made sense for Marcus Semien, right? And also, I don't know if it was that day or the next day, they got John Gray, and it's like, okay, beef up the pitching a little bit. John Gray, I think him leaving Colorado is big because now when a guy hits a double, it'll actually stay in the ballpark and not float all the way to becoming a homer. So I think that's big. But the big one, Dame, and this is the first one I want you to touch base on in your analysis. Simeon and Gray, I think we could both agree, pretty good deals. Corey Seager. This to me was unexpected. I didn't expect the Rangers to be the team to give it to Seager. The former 2020 World Series MVP signed a 10-year, $325 million contract. I mean, my God, man. So, Dame, like, just immediate reaction. What were your thoughts when you saw Seager get that deal? Because I thought my screen was wrong for a second. I'm like, wait, 325? What?
It's a whole lot of money. But I know, but when the offseason kind of started, the Texas Rangers were an option. But the second I saw them sign Marcus Semien, I'm like, all right, so they're going to be out on these shortstops. Like Marcus Semien only played second base for a year, and then he wants to go back to playing shortstop, his natural position. So naturally, I think the Texas Rangers are out on him, and then boom, out of nowhere, you see Corey Seager signs a 10-year, $325 million deal with the Texas Rangers. Uh, Obviously a great deal for them. They're obviously another team like the Cubs that aren't really a contender, but I like that they're spending money trying to make their team better instead of just tanking the season out. So they definitely have arguably the best middle infield in the league. As for the actual contract, Corey Seager, I think he deserves all of it. He obviously didn't get as much as Francisco Lindor, but Lindor's I think was over 12 years, so I think maybe Seager gets more per year than Lindor does, but just less total. But I think he absolutely deserved it. He's a World Series MVP. He's obviously plays a premium position on the field as shortstop. He's a left-handed bat. He hits for power, contact. He doesn't strike out often. He's just a great overall player. He's 28 or 27, I believe, so he's a good age too. Obviously, not all these big contracts. They're never pan out throughout the entire contract. Like you get a bargain for the first half, and then you kind of got to deal with the second half of the contract. That's just how all these big contracts are. So I'm not really worried about that for the second half of that contract for them. But as for Corey Seager, man, he got his money. He's the highest paid shortstop right now of the free agent class. I do think Correa is probably going to top him, whether it's per year value or total value. As for right now, it's a great signing for him. He gets paired to Marcus Semien in the middle of that infield. He got the money he probably wouldn't get from any other teams Cough, cough. The Yankees, who are in desperate need of a shortstop, yet they're not spending $1 to make their team better, which is a topic for a different day. But I like it for both sides. Honestly, I think the Rangers are definitely going to be a better team. Yeah.
And I think we've already said it, like the potential of an expanded playoff, because we don't know it yet. That could change things, because I think this was big here by the Rangers. I think for all intensive purposes, like the thing with the Rangers is obviously they weren't good last season, but they weren't bad, right? So I think at the end of the day, like Simeon makes sense to me. You get more power in there, and now Seager, obviously the contract, like how is it going to look at the end, because he's going to be 37 when the deal is done. Is he going to reach the end of that deal? Who knows? Especially with his injury history, and I think that's the biggest point for me. Even though I've personally always been a Corey Seager fan, but I do like the idea. Like we've already said this, Dame. We like seeing these teams spend. I like seeing the Rangers going at it, right? Like they just got the new ballpark. You got some young pieces there. Spend money, and I think this is great. I would still like for them to get another pitcher or two. That's just my personal opinion on their offseason. And can they? We'd have to look at the remaining free agents, of course. But I think this is actually pretty good. I think this would make people want to go to the game. Like, okay, this team isn't just giving up. Like they're gonna go for it. And I think in baseball, with the state of affairs, and especially what they could be still after even the negotiations, I think that's big. But at the end of the day, I think Semyon, for his deal, 7 for 175. Yes, he's a little bit older, but I think if his power maintains, he'll be good. And especially because you have the designated hitter, dude, he can make a career, the rest of his career, just being a DH, and that's probably what it's going to be. I'm not saying
Absolutely.
I'm not saying he's a bad defensive player. Like, don't get me wrong, but like they could just keep him at DH for the rest of his career, right? And
Yeah, he plays second base. That's not a position where he really needs to move around a lot like he would at a natural shortstop position. So that helps as well.
yeah, exactly. Um, so at the end of the day, yeah, Simeon. I think Simeon. We both agree. Like home run hit, home run of a signing, literally and figuratively. John Gray was a good pickup. Again, personally, I'm so happy for him for leaving Colorado, and Corey Seager, to be determined, but we like that they're spending for certain, for 100% certain. So, Dame, we've talked about the AL West now. We talked about a lot of the big signings. We still have a couple two, excuse me. We have a few remaining for guys that signed, and a lot of AL teams here, Dame. Like, it's predominantly been the
Mm-hmm.
AL signing a lot of these
It's the
guys.
AL and the Mets.
Exactly. All the NL talk is finished essentially after the Mets. But let's get to like at least from my screen here, Dame. I don't know if there's like one or two I'm missing, like from what I've written down here, but let's go to at least one of, if not the last biggest signing that we'll talk about. Javi Baez. This is not this is not the infielder that we
Nope.
thought was going to be going to the Detroit Tigers, Dame. We both had Carlos Correa. I think everyone had Carlos Correa going to the Tigers. Who knows if he still goes there? Maybe just on a lesser deal. Highly unlikely, but still. But Javi Baez goes to Detroit. 6 years, $140 million. You talk about shortstops, Dame. He himself joining that list of guys going there. The 29-year-old, 31 homers and 87 RBI last season. Yes, he had. Well, I'm not going to go too much into it like beforehand, but he signs a 6-year deal for Detroit, 140 mil. We talked about the Tigers wanting to make that big signing, and I
Kind of
so
did. Kind of
yeah,
did. Kind of didn't.
yeah. So
Based on what
this
we were expecting.
right, this is kind of my point. Like, and I want to throw this to you, Dane. My idea, we both thought it would be Correa, right? And I guess maybe this means Correa is going to sign somewhere else. Do you think, Dame, that the reason Detroit did this is because they're, instead of spending the 300 plus million on just Correa, do you think there's another player out there that they want to put another 100 million down on and to go after in free agency, right? And it doesn't even need to be a hitter. Maybe it's a pitcher that's remaining on the market. Like again, I don't have the list of who's remaining out in front of me, so like I'm not saying this like it shouldn't be taken for gospel, but I think there is an argument to be made here that is Detroit maybe saving for something here? Are they trying to make something else happen and really going more forward this offseason? Kind of like what we've seen the Rangers do, right? Like, yes, the Rangers gave the big contract, but dip into multiple pieces.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. Like the Tigers are nowhere near competing. Like they need a lot of help everywhere. Like one couple signings in the offseason isn't going to change where this team is going to be headed. So they might be saving for another contract, but I think it's really they're not trying to put all their eggs in one basket in one kind of offseason because all these they have, I think, a top three farm system. They have, I think, the third best prospect in all baseball. Like they have guys coming up that aren't ready yet, but they're coming. So there's no reason for them to put all their eggs in one basket in one off season and waste all their assets and money. And then by the time these guys are all ready and ready to compete, you're kind of strapped with the back end of these big contracts that you gave out this off season or last off season or the next off season because you just wanted to spend money for whatever reason. Like they have a plan of where they're gonna go, but I think if they do sign any more contracts, it kind of there might be high money, but they might be short years because of like what I said. When these guys come up, you don't want to be strapped with bad contracts because then you really can't improve your team when you have all your best core guys really kind of developing and exploding. Like you want to be able to have flexibility, whether it's to trade or to sign free agents for big money to really take you to the next step and become a contender at that point. So I think that's mostly where it is because with the Carlos Correa thing, I read that the price range for them was just too much, which is like well, basically what I'm saying. Like they don't want to be strapped with their money and payroll when all their young players that they expect to be big contributors at the big league level come up to the majors, and then you're kind of stuck and you don't know how to really improve that team.
Right. And when we were talking with Detroit, it's like, yes, you know, they potentially are in that category now where they'll spend. But like you said, with the farm system they have, with the guys that are coming up, heck, with some of the guys that have already debuted on the roster, right? Like you have to keep the future in mind. And at the end of the day, like don't put all your eggs in one basket for a class where maybe at the end of the day, Detroit just saw it and it's like, look, we'll look to the future. Because think about it, like Javi Baez, I think compared to Seager, I kind of prefer this contract, Dame, because yes, Baez is a little older, but it's only a 6-year deal, right? And again, it in the AL, I think Javi Baez, it's more realistic that you could see him if his abilities decline in the last half, he could be a DH and he could be a 25, 30 home run hitter, right? Like there's ways to make this work if you're Detroit. And I think relatively speaking, it's not a bad deal. And at the end of the day, like so many times teams get caught up in wanting to sign the big name. So many times it's all about, got to go for the signing, got to go for the signing, got to go for the names. I think Detroit is, we were talking about teams and how they're rebuilding. I think Detroit's doing the rebuild right here, Dame. Like, yes, Javi Baez helps. He makes a difference. He's a name, but there's still more spread the wealth, right? There's more money they could put in different places. And I think at the end of the day, I like that for them. I really do.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it all comes down to their future because they're not contending now. So they gotta, although they want to try to improve now and try to bring fans into the stadium and show that they're going to be competitive, they still need to think about their future because that's really when they're going to contend. They got to be realistic and know they're not going to contend now.
Exactly. So I think this is a team looking itself in the mirror and, making sure they have it. Um, but yeah, that just about, I think that just about wraps it up. Again, that's like all the main names I had, Dame. Is there one or two names that you want to get to before we continue, or?
I don't think there's any more names that signed big names that are worth talking about. So I know the Yankees didn't sign anyone. I know that. So we could just move on.
We'll get to that, in a later segment here. But of course, obviously, Dame, the thing is that even with all the signings we've talked about, while in one aspect we can't wait for these guys to start playing soon, we don't know when they're going to start playing. So news came out recently, and I think even I forget what day of free agency it was, Dame, but like even Jeff Passan himself tweeted it out. It's like he confirmed it that a lockout was coming, and cue anyone that made a Game of Thrones meme where winter is coming. It said lockout is coming, which for baseball, let's be real here, this has kind of been expected. I've been calling a baseball lockout for several years now. I think most people have, and it's finally here upon us, Dame. So not really surprised. Like I said, I wasn't surprised. I don't think you were. But what was your disappointment in seeing the news about the lockout? How like I think in all the leagues, I know it's been a quarter century since the last baseball lockout, but I think it was a disappointment to see the fact that the owners, like of all the sports here, like they're real. I think the MLB owners are being the most difficult when it comes to negotiating with the players here.
Absolutely. I mean, this lockout everyone knew was going to happen for years. Like the Players Association said they've been saving up money in case games are missed for 5 years now, I believe. So everyone was ready for this lockout coming because there's so many things that these sides are just not agreeing on and have different views on. So I know I definitely saw this coming. I know pretty much everyone saw this coming in. Man, I just hate these owners, man. I just hate the way baseball is running. Don't get me started on this commissioner who's just siding with these owners. He's just a moron. And I can't believe he's a commissioner. Like, Bud Selig, I think, was pretty good at what he did. And then just bringing this fucking doof. Like, I'm so sick and tired of him. And he just needs to go because, although there probably still would have been a lockout if there's a different commissioner, because the owners are so, they're, they're just so weird and cheap and just, I don't know what they're trying to do with the game of baseball. They're trying to ruin it. But I definitely think another commissioner would have kind of mended sides and brought this to a resolution a lot quicker than this was going to be. I do think this lockout is going to be extremely long. The benefit of this is that there's 4 months till the regular season, so hopefully there's no baseball missed. But as of right now, there can't be no negotiations, no signings, no trades, nothing like that. So it's kind of going to be boring for baseball fans who really enjoy that kind of stuff. Like me, honestly, I think that's one of my favorite parts of baseball is all these negotiations and trades and free agents and stuff like that. So it's definitely going to suck. I'm really hoping and praying that there's no games missed, but honestly, with the way stuff I've been hearing and how far apart these sides are on certain issues, I wouldn't be surprised if games are missed. Like, there's just to mention a couple things. You have expanded playoffs that the owners want, the players don't, because I think it's stupid. I think that there's not enough teams to have expanded playoffs. I know there's talk about a salary cap. There's talk about raising or lowering the luxury tax, the universal DH. There's so many different things that these sides are just so far apart on. Like this week, they've had a couple meetings. They're only like 30 minutes long. Like that's when I knew I'm like, yeah, this is gonna get bad.
Right, and I think the funny thing is, Dame, some of the stuff you brought up, it's like universal DH, like that's more a traditionalist thing. That's more like it's not that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things. I've listened to a lot of David Sampson and like discussions he's had about this. I'm actually going to listen to him after we record. Funny enough,
Yeah, I listened to
and
him too. Yeah, he's good.
yeah, and his most recent stuff that he's going to talk about this. And I'm really going to be intrigued. I haven't heard from him yet, so I want to hear like his maybe not initial thoughts, but like it'll be my initial hearing of what he has to say about it. And I'm sure he's going to constantly talk about it, throughout the process. But what he's talked about with negotiations before is like when it comes to this kind of stuff with the CBA, it's like the owners will throw players bones of like either like they're going to pretend to really care about certain issues and they'll let the players have certain victories here so they could get it. So obviously you talked about it, Dame. Like, what is it like maybe one or two things that you hope can get negotiated like with relative ease here that's like this isn't a big deal, let's just move on with it. And what do you see as like the one or two issues that's going to be the biggest sticking point in the CBA? Because like the all the issues, well, I think aside from the DH, I think you brought up some legitimate talking points of like what both sides are going to be arguing over here.
I think it's gonna be the whole money situation, whether it's salary cap or a luxury tax. Like that's I think is gonna be a major sticking point because I know a lot of the owners are frustrated the way Steve Cohen's been just throwing out money out there. I like what he's doing. Obviously, I think a lot of fans like what he's doing because he's trying to improve the team. But these owners don't like it because it puts a lot more pressure on them to spend money when they don't want to do it, acting like there's some poor billionaires or something like that. Like it's kind of annoying. So I think there's gonna be a major sticking point because obviously, if there's a salary cap, you're not gonna be able to spend as much as Steve Cohen is because it's definitely gonna be lower than the Mets payroll, which is like 265 right now. So I think it'll be lower than that. And obviously a luxury tax, like it might not be a salary cap, but if you get over the luxury tax, you pay more, like double or something like that than what the contract actually is. So obviously owners would probably want that lowered or higher, so they don't have to either pay the players or they don't have to pay as much in the luxury tax. So I think that's gonna be a major sticking point, the finances part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of the finances, since you broke it down, I think ultimately like the way that MLB would even try to do salary cap, I just think is so interesting because it's like I think you'd obviously have to follow football's model, and like it's higher than the other sports, like compared to basketball and hockey. Even though hockey should be raised, but don't get me started on that. That's a story for another time. But when it comes to baseball, I think baseball would follow the football mold. But I would almost have to think, Dame, like baseball, if they had to try to put in a salary cap, it would have to be way higher than football's because, yeah, in football, like, yes, you get the quarterbacks and then there's everyone else. In baseball, you have your top two hitters, your top two pitchers, like maybe a third outfit, like a third hitter. Your third pitcher is making a decent chunk, depending like I don't know. I just don't see a way where they could properly negotiate the salary cap. I did just me personally. Like I don't know what number they would have to agree on or like try to find a base to. You know what I mean? Because I think. I just think at the end of the day, like the luxury tax, I'm not surprised because I think with or without a salary cap, man, teams are going to break that luxury tax. Let's
Yeah,
be real
absolutely.
here. These owners just want to spend, and because the owners want to spend, like that's what part of me makes me think like the salary cap is going to be such a sticking point because it's like the owners, some of them, like you said, there's the idea that they don't want other owners to take advantage, but then like what if they eventually find themselves in a situation and it's like, dang, I want to spend this money now, but I have a limit. Like that's why I think it's so different. What I want to key in on here, Dame, just before we continue to who's remaining and like the guys who are now going to miss out, have to wait to sign, because of the lockout. Um, the expanded playoffs. We know the owners want this. Is there a way, Dim? I know you said that you don't like the idea of the expanded playoffs, and I do see your point. I personally I don't mind an expanded playoffs if you do it right. I think there's a way to do the expanded playoffs right if Major League Baseball were to try. Let's just say hypothetically, Dame, that everyone agrees on both sides they're going to expand the playoffs, right? Let's just say, what would your solution to that be? Like, what would you think is the best way to expand the playoffs while also making it so like the winning your division still has value?
It's just gonna be tough for me to see that because if you put four, their expanded playoffs needs to be 14 teams. So I kind of went to the standings when I saw that, and I kind of looked at who would be in the playoffs last year based off that. So it'd be two extra teams per thing. So in the AL, it would be Toronto and Seattle, and then in the National League, it would have been the Reds and Philadelphia. The Reds and Philadelphia, I don't think had any reason to be anywhere near the playoff conversation. Those are two really pretty bad teams last year, and they had no reason to be in the playoff conversation or playoff push. Had no reason to have any chance to win a World Series. In the AL, like obviously Toronto Blue Jays, I do think they deserve to have a playoff shot. So, and then the Mariners, like I said, they had their kind of Cinderella run, but I don't think they were really a playoff caliber team if you looked at them. So, out of the four extra teams that would have been in the playoffs, it would have just been the Toronto Blue Jays, in my opinion. So it's kind of hard for me to even find any kind of leeway in being okay with this 14 team playoff. But like you said, if there's any kind of way, I guess I don't know, you give the division winners like a bye or extra home game or something like that, extra day of rest, something like that, I guess. But it's so hard for me to see that because I just don't want to see bad teams in the playoffs. Like it was the COVID year where you had the Marlins that made the playoffs, like because they expanded playoffs. If it was regular playoffs, they wouldn't have made it. So I just hate this whole concept and idea.
Right. And I think the way you mentioned it, the 14 teams, like 7 on each side total, I think that would likely be what they would do. And I think the way they would do it, it would kind of be like football, where the top seed overall gets the bye, like the quote unquote bye, and the remaining teams go at it. So what I think it would have to be is that they would, because baseball obviously it's not like football. So I think the way it would go in like the 2 versus 7, the 3 versus 6, and the 4 versus 5, I could see them doing like best of three, right? As that round, that could still technically be your wild card round, and then you go to the AL and the NLDS. That could be your best of 5, and then your ALCS and your CS series and your World Series would still be best of 7. Like if I had to guess, I think that's what they would go for. Now, in myself personally, because the wild card game, man, like I know, trust me, I'm all for excitement. I'm all for one moment can make the difference, but like I just think sometimes like the team that should have won doesn't win, right? And recently I think it's more been the case of normalcy. Like the Dodgers won the wild card this year; they very much deserved it because they were so good. They shouldn't have even been in that case. So I don't know. There's just so many different things that baseball has to deal with here. Like I don't know, but I could see them expanding the playoffs. Like I think at the end of this, I think we're going to get expanded playoffs. And I mean, hey, maybe hopefully what we have to hope for is the fact that you know these teams that have already made moves so far that we've talked about, that maybe it'll make them better. So it's like they're somewhat better quality, right? You know what I mean? Like I think that's what you at least have to hope for because you're right. At least last year, I think the AL side of things would have been fine, but the NL, man, like the NL past the Cardinals and the Dodgers was not good.
Yeah, and like if they're gonna do expanded playoffs, like obviously it's to make baseball and owners more money because more views on playoffs and national TV games and stuff like that. If that happens, then they better institute something like a team payroll minimum, so teams have to pay more and like raise the luxury tax or like make no salary cap. Because if they're gonna make more money, these teams got to spend money to make their teams better. Like they have to institute something like that, or I don't know, because that would just be really bad if they're making all this extra money and not spending it.
Right, absolutely. And I think let's be real here. At the end of the day, it is all about money.
Yep.
especially the owners,
Everything's
man.
about money, bro.
Yeah, and honestly, the league, like when you think about it, Dame, we're not going to get in this conversation. This is way too deep for us. But baseball, been this conversation about like attendance and stuff. Like baseball has to figure something out here. Like we're talking about a lot of like the big details, but I think baseball needs to figure out some things internally and like make people want to come to the game, man. Because like league wide attendance has been down for a while now.
Yep.
And I think even this past season, even without the COVID restrictions, like of still recovering from a pandemic, it wouldn't have been great. So I think baseball has a lot to fix, even aside from the problems we're talking about. But of course, like you said, Dame, with the lockout, no negotiations. Agents can't, and players' representation cannot speak to teams. Teams and players cannot, directly be in contact, negotiate, et cetera, et cetera. Because of all that, there are still some guys, Dame, that have not signed contracts yet. Of course, we know the big two, probably the main two that we're going to talk about, but Trevor Story and Carlos Correa. I'll throw it to you, Dame. Who do you want to talk about first between those two? Is this maybe a tactic from one of these guys, Dames? Like let the let the holdout happen. Let the CBA get negotiated, and maybe afterwards the team will be desperate enough to have to sign him. Who knows? But in all seriousness, what are your thoughts of the two, like those two guys having not been signed to this point?
Yeah, I think Carlos Correa was always gonna wait after Corey Seager. I know it was rumored at the beginning of offseason that Corey Seager was gonna sign before the lockout, and he did. Obviously, I think Carlos Correa was always gonna wait till after because he just wants to top that. And obviously, that's what's happening. And since Carlos Correa, I mean not Carlos Correa, since Seager signed so close to the lockout, it didn't really give time for Correa to really view all his options as quickly. And there's no reason to rush it. Like he's gonna get paid regardless. He's not one of these fringe guys that might be affected by the lockout or something like that. Like he's gonna get paid regardless. So I understand why he's gonna wait. Like you never know. Maybe like I said, the luxury tax gets raised, so these big market teams like the Yankees or Red Sox or these other teams are gonna have more money to spend, so that could help. But yeah, as for Carlos Correa himself, like I have no problem him waiting. It makes sense. There's no reason to rush it. So, but obviously, I hope he's going to be a Yankee, but I don't think that's going to happen because I just have no hope in the Yankees even spending $1 this offseason to make their team better. So I have no idea where he's going to go. I think um, if I had to take a guess, maybe the Mariners, since they're still looking at an impact bat. They have money to spend. They just only spend on Kevin Gausman. They still need a bat in that middle of the lineup. I think that would be a nice fit, and they have obviously the money to spend for it.
Right, right. I think the Mariners are an interesting team here, Dame. Like I think we talked about with like Robbie Ray and that contract. Maybe the Mariners are going to go, the route that we were talking about. Maybe they go the Texas Rangers route. One pretty big contract and then one really big contract. You never know. I'll let you finish out here, Dame. With the Yankees because we've talked about this. This is not a Yankees podcast, ladies and gentlemen, but of course, we're New York based. Well, I'm in Connecticut technically, but semantics. we're New York based. Dame is, of course, a massive Yankees fan, and the Yankees are always going to be in the news, right? And I think they disappointed a lot of people this year with the way they lost out. Um, what's been your reaction so far, Dame? Like to just like I know you said it before, but like, is there any chance the Yankees are just being like, as calculated as can be? Maybe they sign Trevor Story after the lockout ends, or like what's going on?
It's been a frustrating all season so far, to say the least. I think every day there's just been news that's been just getting me pissed off and just making me less and less of a Yankee fan every day. Obviously, their glaring need going to this all season was shortstop, and you see Marcus Simeon go, you see Corey Seager go, and Baez go, and now you just have Carlos Correa and Trevor Story. If I'm being honest, like I do want Carlos Correa, although it's tough because of the whole Astros thing and then the stuff he said about Derek Jeter. But at the end of the day, he makes our team a better baseball team and probably makes us a favor if he does come here. So I have no problem bringing him on here. Like it's all about winning. Winning fixes everything. As for Trevor Story, though, if I'm be honest, although he does make the team better, I'm not so high on bringing him here because he's probably going to make around whatever Trevor Simeon and Javier Baez made, and I'm not cool bringing that onto this team because they do have two premium prospect shortstops coming up, and I do think they could be almost as good as Trevor Story when they do come up. So I don't really want to lock myself into a big deal with Trevor Story, whether it's $25 million a year for 6 years or whatever it is. Like that's just gonna block my shortstops for a guy that might not be a difference maker like Carlos Correa is. I'd rather bring in a stopgap at shortstop and use my money somewhere else. Not save all this money. If you're not going to use your money on a shortstop, use money on something else. Go break the bank for Freddie Freeman. Go break the bank for a pitcher. Go break the bank for Chris Bryant and make him play center field or third base or something like that. Like, I'm not saying don't sign a shortstop if it's not Carlos Correa and just save that money. Like, go use it somewhere else because this team needs to be improved. But as a Trevor Story, like I said, I don't think he's that much of a difference maker. I'd rather spend the money somewhere else and wait for our prospect shortstops to come up and develop that way. But Carlos Correa, I do think, is that difference maker that you deal with the prospects. You either trade him away or you move him to a different position because Carlos Correa has proven he can hit in the postseason. He's a platinum gold glover at shortstop, and eventually he could definitely move to third base. He has that kind of arm strength and range. So you have all these different options, Carlos Correa, and he's just big time. Like, he's built for the moment, and that's what you need with the Yankees because they're in the postseason each and every single year, and they need players that can perform under that kind of pressure.
Right, and I think at the end of the day, the Yankees, and I don't want us to just like look like we're harping on the Yankees because obviously the Dodgers are being specific with how they spend. They kind of have to considering Trevor Bauer and him, and they can't really do anything about him. I think the Astros were waiting to see if they try to make a deal like the two of us as well. Like we talked about, like you let Correa go, you get Trevor Story. I think there's a good amount of teams here that we're waiting on, but I think the Yankees are number one, and they always will be. That's tricks of the trade when it comes to being the most storied franchise in the history of the sport, but also the one that's also spent so much money. So I think at the end of the day, it's just a waiting process when it comes to the Yankees. I think, kind of your point, maybe they just let it rock. Maybe they just let other teams pick it up and they try one last time with this core and they see what it does. Who knows? Maybe they're waiting for a future class. Maybe they're waiting for the youngsters to come up. Maybe a future free agents class has their eye. Maybe Cashman's thinking ahead. Who really knows at the end of it? But I definitely see your point, and I think most teams would feel this way because it's the off season. Like, you don't want to feel like your team's doing nothing to get better, right? And obviously we won't
shit every year besides the good cold.
and we really won't know until the time comes. But like, you don't want to feel like you're letting opportunities go. And does it feel that way for the Yankees? You can maybe argue it, although the Seager deal obviously not. But I think, of course, like you said yourself, Simeon, like just I think the Yankees could have made a move, like a real move at this point, even if it's pitching. Even if it's just pitching, like
they could have done something, bro. You didn't have to be a mega deal. They could have done something.
Yeah. So, Story and Correa being the main two guys for the most part. A couple, other names here and there. We didn't mention him at first, but like the top relievers off the market as well. Raisel Iglesias, he re-signed with the Angels. So that handles it. With relievers, it's really like a hit or miss game, Dame. Like, I think you'd agree there. It's like whoever you sign, you sign.
It's a different guy.
Exactly. Like one or two guys are going to do well in a class and like one or two guys won't. That's just how it works. But yeah, I believe that just about wraps it up here for our MLB free agency reactions and also, CBA talk. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so much for joining us on this week's episode of the Somewhat Sports Podcast. As always, you can follow us on at somewhat.sports on Instagram. Our weekly NFL predictions coming out each week. We keep going at it. I've won 2 weeks in a row now. I didn't even realize I won until Chris told us. So there's that. Let's see if I can keep it going now. Probably not, knowing me.
But yeah, tired of second place finishes, man. Every week I'm either second to you or Chris.
It's pretty wild. We have to ask for like an update, as we reach the end of the season here. But that is to come on future episodes, of course. Somewhat.sports for the Instagram page and all that stuff to follow us, support us. We're slowly, very slowly making our way to 100. We would very much appreciate like, comment, but especially follow us there. And of course the YouTube channel where you are listening to us right now. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share it to your friends. Share it to everybody. Like I've said, this is one of, if not the best sports podcasts going. So give the gift. It's holiday season, Dave. Give the gift of the Somewhat Sports Podcast to all sports fans that you know.
Absolutely. You got a Secret Santa? Swing them this way.
Boom. And
great gift.
Buy the gift, buy your usual gift, and then throw this on top for free. They don't have to pay, guys. So, of course, that wraps up this week. Thank you all so much for joining us this time around. And of course, as always, ladies and gentlemen, we will be back next week.